All right, good morning, good afternoon. Whenever you're watching this, Harry from 8186, and hopefully you're all rested back and ready to program. When I talk to you in person, I'll ask you about what you guys did over your holiday, whether you're programming or partying or whatever. I'm always interested in knowing. Um, Midterm marks should be very soon. I know I keep saying that, but you should get them very soon. Anyway, if you have any questions so far about the course or whatever, just email me and all this kind of stuff. So this course, like I said, I keep reminding you, we keep changing technologies very quickly, right? We usually spend 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks per, and we covered some React and we covered some Node, we covered some MongoDB, and we're going to shift gears once again to Microsoft technologies. So again, the goal of the course isn't to learn and say that you know all of these techs. It's that really you could say, hey, I'm a versatile programmer, and if you have a language that I need to learn, I have that ability. And you'll notice the more that we dive into these similar paradigms, that the technologies are very similar. So once you're kind of an expert in how or an understanding of how this stuff works, templates and databases, APIs, you really notice that syntax changes, but how these the connections and everything are made are very very similar, if not identical. And that's again the goal of the class. So without further ado, let's talk about some Microsoft tech. .NET. What is .NET? You know, and I asked this question like you're here with me, but you're not. So I'll just answer it. So you may see it typed out like period net, but it's like .NET, .NET, and this is Microsoft's free open source developer platform, and it allows for the building of many different types of applications. .NET developers can use multiple languages, multiple editors, lots of libraries. It can be used for web, mobile, desktop, games, Internet of Things, all sorts of awesome stuff. I love the Microsoft tech stacks anyway. I think they're very well done, as opposed to some of the open source stuff, which still great, but I think these are more polished. Now you may hear of things like .NET Core, .NET Framework, and these are all you know Microsoft technologies. But let's talk about some of the differences. Um, .NET Framework is the original .NET implementation, and it supported websites and desktop applications, and specifically Windows style applications and Windows style websites and services. You really couldn't use .NET Framework on other platforms. Now there was like some hacks called Mono, but we won't get into that. So then Microsoft released .NET Core, which was a cross-platform open source framework, and that was supposed to, or it does, work on Windows, Mac, Linux, even works on some Internet of Things devices. And then .NET Core was rebranded as just .NET, and then there's no real .NET Framework, .NET Core anymore. So you might see these weird, you know, legacy .NET Framework, .NET Core. I still have projects that run in both, but now we'd refer to it as like just .NET 5 or .NET 6, and I think their current version we're on 7. In fact, there might even be an 8 coming out soon. In fact, 8 is out, and there's going to be a 9. There's 9 preview, so you can get 8. That shows you kind of these slides are a little bit old, a little bit older. So pretty cool. As these slides are a bit older, just as we go through this, if you're going to skip ahead to my coding examples, which I'm sure a lot of you do, um, please note that I'm not going to use Visual Studio. We're going to continue to use VS Code. So the instructions from 11 to 17 on these slides are not relevant. And, some of the things in here apply, but that's not what we're going to be doing. And even like the explanation of these controllers and stuff, I'll explain in the video. So if you do want to skip ahead, you still might want to listen to the video in the background while I finish off explaining this. Anyhow, I know I tend to ramble about the older technology because I'm old. So .NET Framework, .NET Core, and then we have something called .NET or ASP.NET. Now, what is ASP.NET? Crash course. ASP stands for Active Server Pages. And Active Server Pages really came out in around 96, 1996, 90, something like that. And ASP, Active Server Pages, was a competitor for specifically PHP and Cold Fusion and JSP, Java Server Pages, and something you probably haven't heard of, but very, very early technology called CGI. And it's not CGI like you know it on, graphics on a computer, but CGI stand for Common Gateway Interface. And this was server side scripting that ran in a language or a script written called Perl. And Microsoft's goal was to kind of phase out CGI and Cold Fusion and PHP and make it all encompassing in something called ASP. They were pretty successful at it. Now ASP has been around for 30 years, whatever, pretty close to that, which is crazy, right? That's like older than most people in here. And they started integrating it with their other, language or their other platforms. So ASP.NET and ASP.NET Framework. And yeah, basically designed for dynamic web pages. So we can think of it as, we're going to use ASP.NET with MVC and Razor pages. Now, Razor pages is kind of like templating engine, that EJS in Node, similar. Okay, so lots of words. ASP.NET, PHP, Perl, CGI, C Sharp, F Sharp, Visual Basic, VS Code, right? Like there's all these crazy acronyms you kind of have to remember, or at least know part of .NET framework. Um, what is .NET though? Like we haven't really answered that, and you should know that .NET is not a programming language. .NET is it's fundamentally a runtime that supports languages, and specifically it supports C Sharp, F Sharp, and VB. So we program in these languages, and then we use .NET effectively to compile them, or more more importantly, .NET will run our code for us. So with this, you know how you have to install the .NET runtimes. Well, if the system that you're running has the .NET runtime, then it should be able to run whatever the programming language is that we use. So Microsoft's goal was, if we make this runtime and it works on Windows, Linux, and Mac, then people that are C Sharp developers or F Sharp or VB developers will be able to run their programs on any of these systems. So that's kind of the main goal of .NET. So we talked about ASP just a tiny bit, but there's also something called ASP.NET MVC, Model View Controller, and this is what we're going to stick with in this class. And they're both part of the .NET framework ecosystem, even though now we call it core, whatever. I mean, maybe the terminologies don't even matter for this class. Know that they kind of exist. But I want to focus on the MVC aspect. Last semester we did ASP.NET um, web form applications. This one I want to move to the later technology. So we're going to use something called Razor, and Razor is like a front end. Well, it's kind of a server based markup language for HTML. It lets you insert C sharp code into HTML, which then gets converted into HTML, which then gets sent out to your client, like your browser, and all of this. So, lots and lots of ways this technology combines and works together. Now, as usual, I like to do demos as opposed to reading through the notes. On this one, between again 11 and 17, um, we're not gonna use that, but we will do demo, and I'm gonna explain MVC at least to the best of my ability to you guys for this purpose. So what you want to do if you're following along, open up your VS Code, make a new directory, go to terminal, new terminal. If you don't have .NET installed, you're going to have to go grab it. And like I showed you, I think there's .NET 8, which is the LTS, and feel free to use 8 or 9. I don't know what the new features of 9 are right now. I haven't looked at it. If you don't know if you have it installed or not, just type .NET in your terminal and dash dash version. I think you need the two dashes, and that'll tell you what version you're running. I'm running 7. I might even upgrade to 8. In fact, let's do that right now. I'm going to pause and upgrade. And this will be like 1 second for you guys, but hopefully this doesn't break my all my builds. But I'm going to download this SDK for my Mac. If you're downloading for Mac, don't forget if you have a new M1 or an M2, you're going to have to get the ARM64 version of this. Anyway, let's see. Be back in 1 second for you. So it looks like I should be updated. It didn't. It only took actually 1 minute, but there you go. So I'm running 8. So hopefully, you guys should run 8 as well, and that will keep us all on the same page. And if we get errors, we can fix them together. All right. So, like I said, .NET has tons and tons of different things that we can do. And if you do .NET-H, you can see, you know, tons and tons of commands. But if we do .NET-list, is it .NET list? No, wait. What did I do? Oh yeah, it's sorry. .NET new dash dash list. The cool thing about video is I can pause it or edit it later. Anyway, so if you type .NET new dash dash list, you'll actually see the different types of templates that we can start, which is abundant, right? There's so many in here. Before, if again, last semester you probably worked with console app, you may have worked with class library. These two, like C# is the default, F# VB. If you were in my class, you probably did web app, which I don't even know if they have it in here anymore. Let's just see. Yeah, right here, ASP Core Web App, and this time we're going to use ASP.NET Core Web App MVC. So finally, we get to write some code. If this works, what you want to do is .NET new and then the short name. So in our case, MVC. So when you do this, it should generate a controllers folder, a models folder, and a views folder, as well as a program.cs. And I'm going to walk through all of this stuff with you. Again, if you were in my class last semester, this will look very, very familiar. So so before I was saying like, MVC, .NET and web app, they're very similar, but because specifically the paradigms like MVC, we have to have these in certain folders and set up certain ways just so we can form. So controllers, models, and views have to have those folders, right? MVC. And what is MVC? We didn't even talk about this. So if this is new to you, MVC is an architecture. And this is, I think, probably the easiest graphic to memorize anyway. So MVC stands for Model View Controller, and they all kind of interact like this. But let's get a more detailed one. In fact, maybe we'll just draw one because that's the way I roll. Where's my paint? No, you're in here somewhere. Here we go. Right, so we're going to draw out MVC, Model View Controller. And it's almost like the folders, right? So this is Model. And some professors, some programming companies, they might put code in slightly different places, but the point is like separating your code into different locations. Now, some people will put database information in model. We'll get there. Anyhow, models, you would have been referring to them mostly as classes, right? So model can be an object, a class can be an object. They're basically one and the same. But this model section of your MVC application is typically to reflect data structure, meaning, like I said, your class, person class, some kind of object, whatever. Controller usually contains logic. So our controller actually manipulates the model, and most of the time the controller will fill the model with data as well. So the controller will do stuff like connect to a DB, or it could, have its encryption algorithms in there. In our model, usually, you know, I'm not saying they're dumb, but they're kind of dumb. The controller fills the model. The view is the container that will show the model. So these two kind of talk to each other. So if we consider a view, the viewport, like the web page, the app, the screen, whatever the UI that the user is using. So usually, they're kind of disconnected. And then the view can actually talk to the controller, and usually this is like the circle of the MVC life. So the view, if someone clicks on a button, it'll go to the controller, request something, the controller will fill the model, and the model will get sent to the view. Sometimes the controller can directly update the view. Depends if the controller is like an API or something like this. This can just happen as well in here. But this is effectively what the MVC model looks like. And you'll see this architecture again in here. You'll see the controllers models. And we'll make these a little bit easier to understand as opposed to the sample one that they show. Anyhow, with most .NET applications, to make this run, if you've done everything okay, all you have to do is type .NET run, and this should start a web server, like a very small web server, just like our Express server. This is you'll notice some very similar words, right? Like route, and then the middleware that we use, static files, same exact kind of thing that Express is using. Now, Microsoft assigns like pretty much a random port, so just take a look where it says now listening on. It's not 8080, and we can specify this, but we'll just use the default one. Sometimes it's 5173, sometimes it's something else. I don't know. If you hold Control or Command, click on it, it should open a new browser, and you should see this. So if you've done that, you should see this web page. If you did the ASP web app version, you'll notice it's almost identical, right? But the background stuff is very different, and we'll get into that in a moment. So we haven't done too much so far, but if you don't have this running, I suggest you pause the video. All you really want to do is make a new folder in VS Code, type .NET new MVC, and then .NET run, click on it, and you'll be caught up. So as I started out saying, basically every program we write has a program.cs file, right? And we have a main function. Our main function is just directly in this file. And what's happening in this file is just like Express, when we instantiate, the Express module, this is creating a web application. And then down here, this app.run is very similar to the app.listen we did over in Node. So some interesting things in .NET now. So before .NET Core, we used to run all of our .NET web applications in something called IIS, so Internet Information Services. And this is a Microsoft specific web server. Now, you know that in Node, we use Express, which is a module that runs on any platform. You see me run on a Mac, you probably ran it on Windows. So Microsoft wanted to do the same thing as this, and they no longer use IIS. They use something called Kestrel, Kestrel. And if we Google this, you can kind of see it, but it's just a model. Kestrel. There we go. It's just not a module or a library that is built into the .NET platform. So Kestrel is our web server. Again, just like Node in Node, Express was our web server. So we instantiate the web server. Then we have some middleware if we want to use it. This is all by default. And we'll probably play with some of the routing and the static files. If you remember the public folder, this use static files. Our public folder is actually www root, and then we just run, and this is just like our listen, like I was talking about. So we don't have to touch too much inside of the program.cs file, but this is where the actual server runs. Now, by default, you can see that we have a views folder and a home folder. And inside of our home folder, we have index.cshtml. Now, the differences here from before, if you're used to the ASP.NET web app, is that we don't have an underlying .cs file. So these are Razor pages, and we don't have a code behind. And this is where MVC comes into play, where our view is completely separate from our controller. The great thing about this is that we can make views anything we wanted, whether it's a web page, which in this case it is, or a desktop application or phone app or whatever it is. But then the question is, how do I program stuff for the index.cshtml? Or how do I program it for, about page or privacy page? Well, like I said, controllers control everything. And in Microsoft land, if we have a home view, we would also have a home controller. And specifically, if we have a home view, we must have a home controller that's named home. And this is how, when we run or build the project, the runtime knows where the controller is for this view. So we have to call it in relation to whatever we call the folder that we're in. So if I was, for example, to make a new folder called, I don't know, what could I call it? Cars. I would have to have the equivalent controller over here called cars controller.cs. Okay, just so you know, we have to do that, and we'll make one together. We won't call it cars. We'll just do something else. But let's finish explaining this. So let's open up the home controller, and you'll notice this is C# code, and it looks very similar to your console application code. It looks similar to the code behind that we worked with last semester, or if you worked with it. We inherit from the base class called controller, and this helps us. This is like Microsoft's Express, right? So you know how we set up routes for each one of the pages that were being served? Well, the controller kind of does the same thing. So these iAction results, these are actually our routes. So if I do route index, this will be route privacy, right? So this is kind of where we can do all of our stuff. In this case, we have to name the function, or AKA the route, the same as whatever the view is in the folder that we're in for the home controller. I know that's like a lot of words to say, but it'll hopefully become apparent. Now, just notice, right? So we want to have the home view, and we'd like to serve the index file for home. So inside of the home controller, we actually have to say, hey, here's a route for index. Now, if I created a new file, say in home, called about.cshtml, totally blank, right? In the home controller, I would have to create a route for it. Just like in Express, we would have to do the same thing. Create a route for about, right? So on and so forth. So this is, how we kind of do this. I want to show you some, I wouldn't say weird, but interesting things. So I'm just going to go back to our running page. Where did it go? And this is just a weird caveat. Notice that localhost and then our port number, and then we have nothing after it. But if I do home/home, it's actually the same page as our root page. Weird, yes. It's just how this works, because every other page, like for example, home/privacy, right? So this is typically the controller, and then this is the view that we're working with 90% of the time. So if I want to do home index, you'll see it's actually the same page as just home, and it's actually the same page as just the localhost. The only thing that applies for is index. Everything else we actually have to say controller first, then the view. So I'll say that again. Our home controller, whatever index is in whatever the base controller is, in this case home, um, you don't have to type in the fully qualified name. For everything else, we do. So again, example, if I run this code and visit privacy, notice that it's localhost 513 home, which is a controller, and then privacy. But if I do just privacy, I get nothing, because there is no controller for nothing. So in Microsoft land, it's usually controller, then view. It is important because you can get lost pretty easily if you don't know that, right? So in the models folder, we don't have too much. We have an error model, and you'll notice this is a class just like any other class we made. But I'm going to do a demo where we're going to create a person model and pass it to a controller somehow. So Yeah, what I was saying. Oh yeah, right. So I want to make a new controller. Specifically, I want to make a new view, and I want to make this view for cars, right? And we can do this manually by doing what I said before. I can actually just right click on the views folder. And notice my icons are like they're yellow, pink, whatever. I have an icon plugin, but yours might be just different. But it's still a folder. So if I right click and do new folder and make it a cars folder, I guess we are using cars. And then I add a new file in here. We'll call it index.cshtml. And let's see what else. Sorry to typo there. CSHTML, right? So here's our car. I'm going to change some of this. Instead of it saying welcome, I'll say cars, right? So I made a new folder called car. It doesn't change pink in here, just the pink one is for home. And then index.cshtml. And then in controllers, I also have to create a car controller. So remember that I said every folder that you make in here, mostly every folder, has to have the equivalent controller if you want to access it effectively. So in controllers, I'm just going to do file, new folder, or new file, and then I'm going to call it carcontroller.cs. And I'm going to take all of the code from home controller and paste it into car controller. Now notice that we get errors, right? Because home controller already exists. So we do have to change this to car controller. And anywhere that it says home controller, we're going to change to car controller. Even though this is valid code right now, this home controller is referencing the other home controller. Make sure you change it to whatever it is that we're called. In this case, we just have a route for index, right? Because car index.html is what we want. So we don't need one for privacy in our cars controller. So again, I'll just say this and you can rewind it if you want, but in views, I made a new folder called car. And in car, I made an index.cshtml. Remember in your brain that index.cshtml is not an HTML file. The server will manipulate this file and then send it back. But we're not actually reading or serving this file. That's why it's CSHTML as opposed to HTML. In the controllers, we right click, make new file, call it car controller, and then replace everything that says home in it when you copy from home controller into here. If this works, restart your program um, and then go to that page. So we'll just go here. And this is our home page. And if I type /car, I should get my car page. Oops. Now here's the question. Did I? Yes, I did. I didn't notice I didn't save this HTML, so I better save that first. We'll go back and restart our server. Every time you make a change, you have to restart your server, which is kind of a pain. There's a way around it. You can research that if you want. Go back here, and if I type /car, I should get cars. So this is how we add pages in this version, right? Before in Express, if you just think about Express, I keep referencing it because we just did it. You would go to the views folder, right click new file, add the HTML file, and then inside of Express server.js, you would add a route for that. So the controllers are kind of like the routes, but we can go do a lot more in .NET controllers, in my opinion. All right, so let's talk about models for a second, and then we basically have the basics. So again, I'm gonna create, or inside of my models folder, I'm actually gonna create a new file, and I'm gonna call it. We'll stick with car. So I'm gonna do car, and one kind of important note is we want to make sure our namespaces are correct because it's going to matter for later, and I'll show you where. So this namespace is our project name, which I just called week 9, and then whatever folder we're in. In this case, it's controllers. So when I make a new model, I actually want to be in week 9, and I want to be in the models namespace or folder. Then I can create my class just like I would any other class. And we do public. Let's make it, we're going to make an int here and call it ID. And this is going to be for later because we're going to have a primary key and we're going to use some code first database stuff, which is kind of cool. But keep this in mind for later. So we'll do that and we'll do public string make, and we'll do public string model, right? So it's car. So this is our model or class, right? Interchangeable for car. I'm gonna make a new view, and we will call it car. I guess I could call it cars, right? We'll do car. And I'm gonna put an index.cshtml in here, and I'm gonna grab everything from index and just drop it into or sorry, from home index and drop it into our car index. And I'll just change the h1 to, car, just to know that we're here, car page. Right, so I created the model, created a new folder in views called car, made an index.cshtml. Last thing I need to do is that controller thing again, so I'm going to do car controller. And I know this, we just did this, but the goal of this now is I want to pass a model into this index. And I know I'm saying pass it. It doesn't really pass it, but you'll understand in a moment. So I'm going to grab all of the stuff from home controller and go to car controller, replace again. And I don't need the privacy one, and that should be this. So first thing, I made the car model, but I haven't done anything with it yet. But I'm gonna actually build my site and test it, right? Because I have done a few changes, and the test here really is just to see if the controller route for car is gonna work. So let's give it a shot. And if I go /car, I should get it, which it works, right? I'm getting sick of actually typing in car, so since we're here, I'm actually going to open up this shared folder. And if you look under layout, you can actually look at this, and this is like a template engine, right? Here's all of our HTML code. This render body is where our index files get rendered, where our privacy gets rendered, any of our views. But we also have the nav bar, so I'm going to add a link to car. And in here it says ASP-controller, so we want to use the car controller, and then I just want to go to index, and we can call it car home, or whatever, just call it car. This is just going to allow me to have a button at the top of the screen. Right, I'll run it again to show you the change. Right, so we have it up here, right here. Click on car. Now we can jump around the site a little bit easier. Okay, so now I would just like to get some information from our controller, which our car controller, into my car index. And, at the end of the day, like I said, our controller could actually contact or connect to a database, fill a model, and then render the view and send the model to that view. And that's kind of what we're going to do, except for I'm just going to manually create the model. So I'm going to say car equals new car. Pretty simple. And we'll do car.make equals Volkswagen, car.model, I don't know, GTI, right? And it's as simple because view is a function built into .NET. I can just pass my car model into the view. So when this view gets rendered, like I said, it's not really passing it. This is a render engine that's going to take, data from our model and kind of insert it into our Razor page. And I'll open up car, and you can see it's pretty blank in here. And the question is, how do I get that model info over here? And it's pretty easy. So there's some basic code that we need in here. Number one, notice at the top there's an @ symbol and then the two brackets and view data. We'll come back to what view data is next class. But at the very top, we want to do @ and then the word model. And this is why the namespace is important. So I'm going to do week9.models.car. Right? And this is going to allow us to reference the model car inside of the namespace models inside of our actual view. Right? And then the code that we're going to use is @ and then a capital M for model in this case, and then whatever it is that we want to reference. right? So in this case, I want to reference make. Now, some of the, I guess, weird thing um, in our controller, right? I'll open this side by side. In our controller, we called our model car, and then I'm saying we pass the car model into the view. But what happens is this view function that Microsoft so generously created for us, Microsoft doesn't know that we're going to send a car model. It doesn't care. It just sends it as an object. So we could send any object in here. And over in our view, Microsoft, again, they don't know what our model is called, and we don't define it. We just say, hey, we're going to pass a model, and it's going to be based on week 9 model's car. So that's why down here, instead of typing car.make, because Microsoft doesn't know what that is, we actually have to type model.make. And model is just in reference to this model that's up over here. So that's why we type model instead of car. But we have access to everything. So there's make. We could also type, it's weird because I'm we said model and car. Maybe I should have not used model, but model and model are different things. I shouldn't have even used that. Maybe I should use person. Hopefully you understand this. So this is not the model of the car. It's okay. I'm gonna change this from. I'll change it from model to year. Let's do that. That was a kind of confusing. Whatever. Let's do it this way. So you don't get confused with the wording because I almost got confused with it. Okay, so now I have car with make and year, right? And I'm going to pass the object called car into my index. And now, um, as I was saying, this is referred to as model as opposed to actual car. So model.make, model.year. If I run the code, fingers crossed, this should show VW and whatever we put 2005. Click on car, and there we go. So pretty easy to pass information across to our view just by using the controller. And imagine if this was like a list of cars, we could pass a list, and then we can use, for each statements in here. Basically, if you want to write code inside of what I'm trying to say, inside of a razor page, you use the at symbol and then brackets, and that's how you write code inside of here. I noticed too, and I don't know if it's just my laptop, but sometimes I'm writing um, code in here, and it will give me an error like this, but in reality, I don't have an error. Um, Sometimes you just have to save the file or even like close it and reopen it, and it should get rid of the error. Um, I don't know why this is giving me one. Let's see what it says. Problems, warnings, annotations, or end of directive expected semicolon. Yeah, see, I restarted Visual Studio and the error went away. Sometimes that happens. I don't know why VS Code does that. Sometimes glitchy. Anyway, as I was saying, if you use an at symbol and a bracket, we can actually run code inside of those brackets. We can also do for loops, for each. If this was a list, we would do model dot whatever. Maybe we do var car in model dot list, right? Whatever the list is, car list, and we can iterate through and output the code. So it's a little bit like the templating engine in Node, right? Because we can kind of insert code and output HTML at the same time, which is cool. Anyway, that's it. So there's going to be a lab this week. You guys should do it real quick. I'll make it due. I'll make it due next week. Not a big deal. But it's basically going to be making this, adding a file, adding controller. Pretty easy stuff. Next week, we'll get into databases, how to hook this up to a DB. We might even use the MongoDB. I'm not sure yet. We'll see how that goes. Otherwise, have a great day.